Hi, welcome to Module 3, How to Change Codependent Behavior. In this module, we are going to give you a roadmap on different things from language skills to acknowledging your emotions to being able to deconstruct a situation and really get clear about, are you focused on someone else's behavior or on something you can control, which is your own. And we're going to walk you through this in the coming slides so that you'll be able to have a working knowledge on what to do. Healing starts when we understand what we can control and what we cannot control. And this is one of my most favorite parts of breaking free from codependent behavior. It's something very personal to me because when I was living with my late ex-husband, I was so zeroed in on his behavior, and then also on Lyle's behavior when she was in her addiction. And it was a way for me to support my anxiety. So if you're here today and you've found that you're annoyed or really struggling or afraid of something that could happen because of someone else's behavior, I would say to you that it's really time to get clear about what you can and cannot control.
And I think this is the first biggest piece of navigating how you make shifts in your codependent behavior, because when we are so focused on someone else and how can we possibly control them, it gives us a false sense of security and oftentimes a false sense of control, which leads into this spiral of, oh, well, this went in my favor because I did this. And it doesn't serve us, and it perpetuates us further into our codependent behaviors. So this is the first big key, is really identifying what am I powerless over and what can I control. And we'll go into how you do that.
So the following are going to help us know how to break the cycle of codependent behavior. The first thing is developing healthier behaviors and communication skills. So we talked about before, focusing on what you can control versus what you can't control. Understanding that, which we will continue to dive deeper into that as we move along, but understanding that will help you to develop healthier behaviors. If you have a lot of anxiety and you're having behaviors that support your anxiety, then you will be focused on something you cannot control. When you start to shift into healthier behaviors, you're going to be needing to use communication skills. So that would look like, I hear what you're saying. I'm very uncomfortable with where we're at right now. That is a very broad example, and we'll get more specific as we go along, but it's really acknowledging what you're hearing and then using an I statement to set that boundary.
And the next is to create a comprehensive self-care plan. So this is part of one of those healthier behaviors that you develop, really putting the focus back on yourself and what you can control and nourishing yourself in ways that you haven't in the past. And as you create a self-care plan, which will go into ways that you may do this, you are going to not be as interested in unhealthy dynamics and unhealthy relationships, and really learn to value yourself differently and build an esteem that you may have not had thus far.
And also, by creating a comprehensive self-care plan, it empowers you because you are taking control of what you can. Mm-hmm. And then lastly on this slide is foster healthier relationships with loved ones. Fostering healthier relationships takes the above to be in place. So having a self-care plan, having boundaries, using language skills, that's fostering healthier relationships, irrespective of if the person that you're communicating with or living with is in a place to be able to also foster a healthier relationship. By one person in the system changing, the system changes.
Mm-hmm. And I think the beautiful thing about doing so much work on yourself and developing healthier relationships with others and within yourself is you're putting out different energy. So you are putting out healthier energy and in return, inviting it back into your life. So to start, we're going to talk about how to change codependent behaviors and some tools and ways that you can do this.
Recognizing your own feelings, having mindfulness, and understanding that the only thing you can control is your own behavior. All of those are ingredients to breaking the cycle of codependent behavior. Understanding your feelings and responses is multifaceted. We talked about attachment styles before, and understanding our feelings, it's like taking a deep dive under the hood to know where they rooted in. Are my feelings of anger rooted in grief? Are my feelings of anger rooted in fear? Maybe a little bit of both. Am I avoiding and therefore feeling completely resentful? There's so many different reasons that we feel the way we do. And while this course is a brief overlay of codependent behavior, this might be an area that you want to do a bit of a deeper dive into, whether it's through reading or therapy. But in the meantime, what we can say is understanding your feelings. A great place to start is like do a body scan. Where am I feeling what I'm feeling? Where in my body is it landing? And if I've already had a response, why did I respond the way I did? And once you start to get an awareness about why you're doing what you're doing and where it's coming from, that's like being in functional therapy, where you really are discovering the root of what's driving the behavior. And that will give you empowerment to figure out, who do I want to be? What do I want to shift next time?
Definitely. I agree that I think awareness is the magic ingredient here. When we are aware of our feelings and aware of how we respond, that's the key to being able to make shifts and to engage differently. So the next is shifting from reactive to mindful behavior. And this really piggybacks off of what you were saying. We are either reacting to something or we're responding. And when our codependency is in play and we're feeling triggered, it's really normal to get hijacked by fear, by anger, by disappointment. And when we get triggered and hijacked by our anxiety or any of those challenging emotions, oftentimes we react and we aren't in a mindful, reflective state. We often can say things we don't mean or act then out of that anxiety and that fear. And so shifting from reactive to mindful behavior is exactly what we said before. It's increasing awareness, taking a moment to deep breathe, to scan in your body. Where am I feeling this feeling? What's coming up for me? Why is this coming up? And being able to practice pausing. And I say practice because it's not always easy when you're getting hijacked and you want to scream at someone or you want to try and control something you're powerless over. So really gaining awareness, trying to implement a pause and think, who do I want to be in this situation? What's coming up for me? And how do I want to handle this in a way that's healthy for me and loving to myself?
Yes, and also I love the Al-Anon saying, halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And those are just going into it. If you can check in with yourself also to see, where do I want to take a pause when I'm feeling these things, so that if you're taking care of yourself along the way, you will be less inclined to get hijacked because you'll be more grounded. And so therefore, you'll be able to use phrases like, I really need to take a pause, or I'll have to get back to you on that, or I'm struggling right now. Now is not a good time for me to get into this with you. That's how we start to use I statements and taking care of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And then we go into what we've been discussing, identifying what you can and cannot control. And again, this is such a huge component to codependency, and really being able to differentiate what's yours and what's theirs. What are you able to make shifts in? What are you able to focus on? And putting the focus back on yourself so that you're not focused on someone else and trying to run into a wall of controlling them when you have no control over them.
And I just want to add also, because a lot of us feel like we don't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know with Lyle's addiction and with my late ex-husband's addiction, I felt like the only alternative was for my family to blow up or for there to be danger. And while that may be true, the unimaginable part that a lot of us go through when we have loved ones who are really struggling and creating a lot of chaos is that we still have to focus on what we can control, because it is the truth. It's all we can control, and trying to control what we can't control offers us a false sense of control, a false sense of safety, because it's actually not there. And again, we'll get into more of that later. We're excited for you to do the worksheet on contrary actions, feelings, and responses, because once we understand what a contrary action is and the power it holds, we're able to just have that information so that we're a little bit more comfortable being uncomfortable as we make shifts. Whenever we start to create healthy boundaries, it will inevitably lead to healthier relationships and accountability within our families. Because when we start to set boundaries and take accountability for our own behavior, while we can't control how others receive that or what they do with it, our experience in all the years we've been helping families through this and individuals in our therapy practice, our experience is that when one part of the system changes, the whole system starts to change. And while Lyle and I really try to encourage people to get out of the results and stay focused on what we can control right now, the big picture is that more often than not, the system changes for the better.
And I think it's important to point out here that, yes, when there's a shift in dynamic, because boundaries are implemented or something changes, it's really normal for others to have a response to that, for them to be confused, for them to maybe not like the change. You can't control any of that. And growth looks messy. So when our family unit is growing or when an individual is growing, it usually isn't smooth sailing initially. It usually gets a little messy first before you're able to see the light. And so I acknowledge that because it's okay. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay for you to set a boundary and someone to not be on board and be like, absolutely, that sounds wonderful. It's okay. And the importance of staying out of the results is that if you give energy to, oh my gosh, what are they going to say? Or they responded this way initially, you then retract to a place of fear. You empower your anxiety. You're stuck in rumination and you're not able to move forward with that boundary in a healthy way and take care of yourself. And I know for me, 9 out of 10 times, the result is much different than how my anxiety anticipates it to be. And the same is true for several clients that I've worked with. So if we don't empower the fear that we're powerless over either way, it allows us to really take care of ourselves differently. So to dive a little bit deeper into how do we break free from codependency, first, we start off, as we said, with creating mindfulness and really being able to regulate your responses, being in responding dynamics versus reactive dynamics. And so there are so many mindfulness exercises that are amazing. You can easily YouTube some breathing exercises, things like that. We'll point out a couple that we really like. One is journaling, putting pen to paper, holding yourself accountable in that way, and bringing yourself into the moment of really reflecting on your feelings and your responses, things that are going on, is a really incredible way to start this.
And also things like meditation, downloading a meditation app, even just doing 3 minutes a day, taking a bath, lighting a candle and making some tea, listening to the outdoor nature sounds in your neighborhood, anything that brings you a little bit of calmness and that brings you into the present is a mindfulness activity. Drawing, knitting, it could be anything like that. And the thing about mindfulness too is when it's intentional, it really makes a difference. Even if you schedule like for 15 minutes, this is what I'm going to do right now. I'm just going to take a tea break for 15 minutes. Having an intention for something is really helpful. One thing that I've used for a long time, which is really been a game changer, is I use I think we mentioned this before, but the hourly chime. It's an app on our phones, and a little chime will ding every hour on the hour. And that's a great way for us to just do a little check-in of how are we feeling right now? Are we breathing? A little like of gratitude, whatever it looks like.
And just to go back to even taking 15 minutes, I want to break it down even further, because if you are in a situation where you have addiction in the family, or you're in a toxic relationship, or you have kids, which makes oftentimes you have no time, even doing things such as narrating what you're doing. And I had a therapist who was wonderful who shared this with me, because I was like, there's no way I can't go sit and meditate like Buddha for 10 minutes. There is not a chance that's going to happen. And she's like, well, do you make coffee in the morning? And I was like, yeah. And she said, okay, so this is meditation in itself. Narrate in your head each step you're doing. So I'm taking out the coffee cup. Okay, I'm putting it under, I use a Keurig. I'm putting it under the Keurig. I'm clicking the button to have it start to brew. Things like that. So it feels doable for you, and even a minute is enough. We just want to exercise the muscle and get this going so that you're able to create a presence in your moment to moment that you haven't had before. So you're able to work on responding versus reacting and not getting hijacked.
I love that. I love that, because I remember when my kids were little and I was really in the thick of it. And, there was absolutely no way I had any extra time. And, even chewing mindfully. I have to say, I used to keep a little daily reader in the bathroom. And in the morning, I would just read a little page, which took about a minute to 2 minutes while I was going to the bathroom. So whatever works for you to grab it, to grab that little bit of time. And maybe if you're like slammed, maybe it's when you get into bed at night. So it just, whatever works.
And then we go into boundary setting versus controlling behavior. So obviously we spoke and will continue to speak on boundaries. And I love how Brene Brown speaks about boundaries. She talks about boundaries being the most loving act for yourself and others, because you're allowing people to know you, and you're being completely transparent about your limits and what they can expect. So do you want to speak to boundaries and controlling a little?
Absolutely. I feel like if we look at the motivation between setting boundaries versus controlling someone else's behavior, we're always going to end up with fear. Fear has us controlling behavior. Setting boundaries has us coming from a grounded place. That's it. The intention is different on both. They do look differently too, because when we set a boundary, I said this to Lyle when she came back home to live. I said, look, you're going to have to be home by 10 because the dogs bark and I need to get sleep and I'm going to wake up. And so that was a boundary that I set for myself, and she was younger. And of course, 10 felt incredibly early to her, but I still needed to set that boundary for myself. I wasn't trying to control her. I said, if you can't get there at 10, then sleep out at a friend's and text me and let me know where you are so I don't worry. It was just my way of taking care of myself. Controlling behavior might have been, you have to be home by 10 or you can't live at home. Now, mind you, she was 20 maybe when this was going on, but still the controlling behavior would have been more black and white thinking. Mm-hmm. So again, setting boundaries comes from what we need, and it's cleaner. Controlling behavior is prompted because we're anxious, we're fearful, mm-hmm. or we might have strong resentment, and then we want to control.
And I think with control too, another component that comes into it is you're wanting to manipulate an outcome because of fear, because of anxiety. You're wanting to get a certain result. So you're in the results, you're in fear, you're in the anxiety, and you're trying to get an outcome. You're not focused on what do I need, what's for me, which is where the boundaries come into play.
Exactly.
And then we have acknowledged the feelings of fear, anxiety, and helplessness. So I'm not sure if any of you have tried this, but there is so much power in identifying and labeling what's going on for you. We all as humans experience fear, anxiety, and moments of feeling helpless. It's innate. It serves us in a lot of ways. It's in our systems. When, animals get anxious if they feel another animal coming to attack them, it serves them. They're able to protect themselves. So all of this is normal. It's not that you should never have it. However, if you're able to increase the mindfulness, pause, and be able to identify what's going on, what's coming up for me, am I going to set a boundary to take care of myself, or am I trying to manipulate an outcome and control because I'm scared? Giving it a name takes the power away from it.
It absolutely dilutes how you're feeling it. And then by giving it a name also allows you to then start to say, who do I want to be right now? Mm-hmm. Do I want to take a contrary action in spite of feeling this way? Oh, this is my anxiety speaking, or this is my fear speaking. So you start to externalize the feeling so that it doesn't eat you up. And once you start to get in the practice of that, it's so incredible, because it's like this is the gift that keeps on giving. Because right now you're listening to us. You're going to start to have information in order to implement these things. But 10 years from now, you're going to be even better at all of this, and you'll still be using it. So, practical examples for setting boundaries. We're going to talk about a boundary that I had and how it affected Lyle from her point of view. She had been in treatment, and then she had lived on her own a bit, and then came back to live with me while she was getting on with her life and going back to school and working. And I came up with a home contract, and doing what I do and having had a lot of therapy, I was very aware that when I made the home contract, it needed to just be very simple and springboard from what do I need for myself, having my adult child come back and live with me at home. And so I maybe had 4 or 5 bullet points on that home contract. No mind-altering substances, had to be working part-time and taking X number of classes, had to be home by 10, and keep common areas clean. That one I didn't really have too much of a worry about because Lyle isn't incredibly clean. But I wrote that up and we talked about it, and it did not come from a controlling place. It said, look, I'm excited for you to be back at home. I'm happy for you to be back at home. I want to go on board with what I need. If there's anything you need, you can let me know. But these are the things that I really need to adhere to if you're going to come back and live at home. And this is not a threat, but if you can't abide by them, you're going to have to figure something else out. And I wanted to be clear that this wasn't like a threatening thing. It was more of like an adult thing. Like, if these things don't work for you, that's fine. But then it's not going to work for me to have you living at home, because it will be too stressful for me to support you while you're not moving forward in a healthy and productive way. So that's what we did. We had the home contract. Lyle signed it and everything was very clear. And I believe at that time we were getting together weekly just for a brief check-in to see how things were going.
And, in hindsight, I'm like, wow, that was so healthy. That was so great of you. What great modeling for me of setting boundaries and really just taking care of yourself despite any anxiety or fear that came up maybe for you on how I would respond to that or react. So initially, of course, I was like, whoa, what is this? I've never lived home before where we literally have a contract in place. And it was hard to hear. I really understood, given that I was sober at the time, I'd been in treatment for a year, all of those things, that this was for her and her own self-care needs. And it was still hard to accept, because although I was grateful to know the limits and that she was comfortable with certain behaviors and engagement, it didn't leave much leeway for me to engage in behaviors that weren't healthy for me. And being a young adult at the time, that flexibility felt comforting on some level, just getting into my new life. I will say, though, that those boundaries and me really understanding what she needed to take care of herself and support me at the same time paved the path for me to continue to get well and continue to be healthy. So that may have not even been her intention at the time, and it may have been, oh, I need to take care of me with my adult child moving home. And in the same breath, it changed my life, because I had to be responsible for my own behaviors, for the consequences if I didn't follow through with an agreement that we had agreed upon. And it helped me learn how to be an adult and accept life on life's terms, because each thing was a decision. And I had a therapist at the time where I went in and I was like, can you believe this? It's unbelievable. There are all these rules all of a sudden when I move home. And she said, yeah, well, here's the beauty of life. You have a decision. You're empowered here. You can go against what your mom is setting in place, and there's a consequence to every engagement, every behavior. And it really helped me to understand respecting boundaries and working as a team.
Yeah.
Because these boundaries were collaborative. And just to add to that, the fact that I was invited to share, hey, is there anything on your end, any boundaries you want to set? I'm open to hearing that. It made it feel like, okay, we're in this together. We're here to work together, make this a really fun experience, and have a really awesome relationship, versus it just being punitive and, these are the rules and you're not allowed to do that, this and that, which that would have felt more controlling to me. This felt inviting.
What I would like to add, because it's important to cover this, is what happens when the boundaries aren't followed.
Yes.
And with the example we gave about the home contract, there was a time that we were all going on a family trip, and I had scraped and saved, and I was so excited about taking my kids on a trip. And I started to feel a little anxious because Lyle's mood had changed. And while I was very clear about, don't focus on what you can't control, I still had that like worry because her mood changed. Did she relapse? And so after thinking about it and focusing, well, what can I control? I thought I can just ask her to get a drug test. And I hadn't been drug testing her because she was now sober for quite a few years. And I approached her one day and said, hey, I set up a drug test with this lab. I've paid for it. You're going to need to sign something that will allow them to email me the results. And Lyle was in shock. Like, are you kidding me? I didn't, I haven't relapsed. And what happened was that she did go and get the drug test and it did come back negative. And she approached me a day or two later and she said, hey, I want to come clean with you. I had to drop a class and I know the contract said I had to take X number of classes. I had to drop it because I was just buried. And it was an eye-opening experience for me because I realized to trust my instincts. Talking about attachment a while back, I grew up not trusting my instincts because if I felt like something was wrong and my mom tried to smooth it over, say nothing's wrong, I learned that, wow, how I'm feeling, well, I have no ground to feel this way. So that's a very brief example of how do we follow through with boundaries, not by controlling someone else, but by asking for what we need. And I realized there's a lot of complicated situations out there that are far more complicated than me asking Lyle to get a drug test, but there's always a solution. Mm-hmm. And if it's too challenging to figure out what that solution might be, you don't have to do it alone. You can reach out and get some support. I love this activity and I use it in my therapy practice. I also use it personally. There are times in all of our lives, no matter how emotionally intelligent we get or how great our life is, where we're going to feel overwhelmed. And the activity is literally this. Get a pad of paper and do a stream of consciousness about everything that's on your mind. And then once you've completed that stream of consciousness, you might have half a page, you might have 5 pages. Go through it, and if it's a person, place, or thing, cross it out. You cannot control those things. And then make a new list and take everything that is left and write it out. And by each thing, put a little action plan. It's a super simple activity. It helps us to get emotionally organized. It helps us to focus on what we can control. And if the can't control list is still disturbing you, it's still really bothering you, then it would be very helpful to get some support. In our experience, because we've both been in 12-step and a million years of therapy, we're very clear to make a departure from what we cannot control. And to, when we're in fear, we're not in faith. So not in a preachy way, but to understand what is your connection to something greater than yourself. Ask for help from the universe or your God or your Buddha or whatever it is. Do some silent meditation around letting it go if you're struggling. It's in our silence that we get most of our answers. And beyond that, reach out for some support. One thing we both realize is we do not have to do this journey alone.